Hey, this is Alex with the Unbiased TrailBlazer podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify so you can catch every new episode that we post. Also, follow us on Twitter at UnbiasedBlazers. In our bio, there's a link to join our Discord server where you can join in on the discussion. You can give us takes, comments, questions for us to talk about on future episodes. Now, let's get to the show. Rip City, baby. Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Unbiased TrailBlazer podcast. This is episode 15, and we have a guest speaker here that I'm really excited to talk with. His name is Pierce, and he actually was at one point a Portland TrailBlazer, I believe, basketball analyst. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we're going to just kind of get a little interview here with Pierce, talk about his experience with the Blazers, and then kind of his thoughts and feelings on last year, this year, and what to look forward to. So with that being said, Pierce, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. As Alex has kind of alluded to, my name's Pierce. I was a basketball analyst for the Portland TrailBlazers back in 2015 up until 2017. Unfortunately, my basketball career didn't follow suit after that. I've been analyst for accounting companies, healthcare companies, and now a legal firm up to this point. And so, big Blazers fan, obviously, and just kind of excited to be able to share my experience, and hopefully your listeners will be able to kind of get insights of what my job was like and how did I even get it, and just kind of what the day-to-day things that the scouting department kind of looks at.
Yeah, I mean, when you joined the server and said that that's what you did, I was like, okay, we got to see if we can get an interview, because that sounds like such an interesting job. I mean, we sit here and we essentially analyze and talk about our feelings and thoughts on the Blazers right now, and you're actually getting to do it for the Blazers. So I was like, this is just perfect scenario right here. We got to get you in here. We don't have Mike as of right now. He might be joining later, but we do have Fawad. So I'm going to throw it to Fawad to ask the next question. Go ahead, Fawad.
So we want to know a little bit more about like what specifically your job title was and how long you worked there. Like, when did you start? How did you start? Just stuff like that.
Yeah, so I first saw the job posting for the Portland TrailBlazers back in early 2015. I think they started opening positions up in April, I believe. And I remember, as a college student at the time, I was super interested in getting into the gig and wanted to do anything basketball related. My background before that was, I used to be the water boy in high school. I didn't have the athletic gifts and skill to kind of succeed in high school. I mean, my highest level of playing basketball technically I only made the freshman team in high school. And unfortunately, I'm pretty good at basketball now. If you think like Boris Diaw, that's kind of my skill set. Can shoot, can go in the post, really good passer. Just unfortunately, kind of grew too late for high school. But even during high school, I was the water boy for just 1 year, and then I progressed to helping the coaching staff scout out the freshman team and at my high school and everything like that. So what led up to me applying for this position is I would always look at the TrailBlazers website and their jobs career page and see if anything popped up that was related to anything basketball operation. Because anytime you look at their career page, it's usually for the Rose Garden, or I guess now the Moda Center, about like, hey, if you want to be a security guard or if you want to be a concessions worker. And I just remember when I first saw that, hey, you can work as a video analyst for the Portland TrailBlazers, apply here. And that's when it got pretty real at that point. So it started in 2015. I applied as probably one of 1,000 applicants that went through that process. And I was an analyst between 2015 and the end of summer of 2017.
So you essentially started doing the analyst stuff in high school, then, it sounds like.
I was, this actually, I graduated high school back in 2012. So this was about getting, right after I finished community college, heading into PSU, which is for folks that aren't Oregon or Portland natives. That's the Portland State University. Um, and is like kind of the coolest side gig I could possibly have while attending college was
Sure.
get to watch basketball for a living. And we'll discuss later, but it's definitely not as glamorous as the title may have suggested.
So, can you kind of explain like what your job was while you were there?
Yeah. So the simplest terms I always kind of put it whenever I say I'm a basketball analyst. I always kind of use the word tendencies tracker. I was part of a group of people who watched opposing teams game film, and what we did is we used to track everything from pick and roll to defensive sets to rebounding, out of bounds, even the half court heaves at the end of the shot at the end of the quarters. And what that strictly meant was, from a tracking purpose, instead of your traditional box score where you count points, rebounds, assists, turnovers, and everything like that, what the Blazers have come up with their own in-house tendency tracker. So we would watch players, how defenses would react to certain pick and roll coverages, or how teams rebound, or if I'm watching Kawhi Leonard and he goes right on the screen, how many dribbles will he take before he does a pull up or he passes out and everything like that. So
Sure.
a lot of the crux was just a lot of tracking players' tendencies and teams' tendencies and putting that into some type of data analytical, format for the coaching staff to kind of digest and set up game plans for. Um, and so, from a typical basketball quarter standpoint, we have 12 minutes of basketball playing time. It took about 45 to an hour and a half to do one quarter of basketball
Phew.
tendency tracker, to be able to suss out everything. And we're talking everything from, you know, offensive sets, but you also have to do defensive sets for every
Sure.
play too. So you have to track like who is the main person on the pick and roll and everything like that. And I can go a little bit more detail later on, but kind of like everything else, one of the great sayings that really applied for this job, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And that's what tendency tracking was all about. It's about the first domino that would fall that led up to that basket or that shot being created,
Yeah, exactly.
which is really meticulous, definitely from a tracking standpoint.
It's pretty interesting. I was wondering, like, I wanted to ask you how different some of the analytics and stats were that like the team actually does, and compared to like what's publicly available. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and what kind of, I believe, what ended up not, I left naturally from the Portland Trailblazers to pursue a more more reliable income job after college, but I believe my department got replaced by Synergy Sports eventually anyways. And if you're not part of the whole analytical um, news within the NBA or just in the sports world, um, Synergy Sports is like the go-to AI, assisted tracking data NBA database that tracks all like you hear the statistics like CJ McCollum runs 26 miles every year on the
Sure.
basketball court. That's the type of stuff that Synergy does. So I think that what ended up happening to the department eventually, because it's just easier and cheaper instead of hiring a bunch of college students to
Yeah,
do kind of the
exactly.
grunt work. But it's certainly still like the number one thing on my resume in terms of like the coolest job I probably will ever have.
For sure.
Um,
Go ahead, Fawad. If you did, you have another
Oh,
you
sorry.
have a question for him?
Yeah, I'll just continue on. I thought I cut out for a second. Sorry. Yeah, so did you like get to meet with the coaching staff to discuss what you found, or how did that work? And did you ever talk to any of the players?
So, unfortunately, was all the glamour that came with the coolness of the Trailblazers did not come with the accessibility of actually meeting the player or coaches. The job itself was before working from home was cool during COVID. That's what the job was strictly about, is a remote job, and the only person of a contact is the video coordinator manager, which I would assume would report to the video coordinator coach, which last year was Coach Yim. Um, and so that was kind of the hierarchy. There wasn't any kind of special perks. I didn't like hang out with Dame on the weekends, unfortunately, or shoot hoops with like Maurice Harkless or anything like that. And even from like a discount, like kind of perks and benefits, like I recall like the only perk is that we only got like 5% off game tickets.
Oh,
So it wasn't like this glamorous, like I wasn't rolling up in a Range Rover as soon as I got this job. It was, it was a really meticulous, tedious job, but from all that grunt work that kind of led up to that, it was really rewarding
yeah,
to kind of see the team, especially during those seasons, 2015 and 2017. That was, I believe, the one of the year after LA left, and that was kind of like, oh, shoot, we're going to be pretty bad. It might as well just kind of help the team not be that
yeah.
good, or be a little bit better. But we ended up, I believe, being fifth in the West that year. And I like to kind of glow and be like, oh yeah, I was totally the reason why we were fifth in the West that year.
Hey, I'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. If I was able to make Mason Plumlee, or sorry, yeah, was it Mason? Yeah, it was Mason Plumlee.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do better at his job at the end of the day with his defensive liabilities, and I think that's a shining star
We
on my
tribute those
resume, I
wins
can
to
say.
you.
If you
Yes.
can't use Paul Allen's yacht, what's the point of working for the Trailblazers though?
Exactly. And so, and let me go back to how I even got this job in the first place. So you mentioned the coaching staff. I didn't meet with them, but I did have my point man was my video coordinator manager, and that whole process was really meticulous. I didn't really go into the details about how this whole came to be. So I applied for this position, and I took a couple weeks to even hear any back, because after I heard like over 1,000 applicants got this job, I was like, okay, I probably didn't get it if I didn't hear back until I got applied in April of that year. I think I got word back in June going, hey, we're interested. We really liked your cover letter. I'm known for really good cover letters. I remember staying up for like 2 days straight, putting my heart and soul into this cover letter. It's really hard to convince a basketball organization that you're really knowledgeable about basketball when you only succeeded at freshman level of playing. And I think
Sure.
what really stood out was, and even in high school, I mentioned that, I knew all the contracts by heart. I could name, you can name like any player, like Andre Miller. I knew he got paid $11 million a year. I knew his bonuses. I knew everything. Not because I was trying to be a salary person, but that's how interested in basketball I was. And so I put my heart and soul into this cover letter, which I still hold like almost hanging up on my wall to this day, to kind of like pointing to like, oh man, anything's possible. I could probably apply
Exactly.
to be a lawyer without a law degree, which definitely would not recommend, but it's one of those things where it really instills confidence. Over that course of those couple months, I got quizzed, I got tested. There was this whole this almost like NBA Blazers University webpage that they would take you to, that they would ask you, hey, do you know what pick and roll is, or do you know what the rules of the game are, or do you know like just kind of the simple stuff, so you're not kind of faking it till you're making it kind
Sure.
of deal with at least that portion of it. And if that whole process took from June to September as far as quality checks, in terms of like, hey, do you know the game, do you track this, and then they gave me a couple samples of how the how we would track it on the computer. Are you comfortable doing that? So it wasn't a hey, I got a weak process of like, hey, do you know anything about basketball? Great, you're going to start. It was a whole 2-month endeavor of this limbo if I was going to even be put on the team for that season. So I just want to reiterate, it was definitely a tedious, meticulous process in terms of how they were hiring back then.
So actually, I want to ask you two questions here, and one of them's not on our list of questions, so it's kind of a surprise question here. Did they like give you like the next game on the schedule and said, okay, go watch the game film, or was it more of like a week out process? You need to watch this film and get back to us.
Great question. And they actually, so it was a group of group of analysts. I think a team between maybe 8 to a dozen people or so I was a part of. And what they did is that they prioritized their game schedules for upcoming opponents. So if we were going to play the Pistons next week, they would prioritize all Piston game film to be analyzed up until we play them that week, and then the next game, the Grizzlies, the Lakers, the Nuggets, the world. And so we actually never watched Blazers games itself. Because that was just the coaching staffs, the main coaching staffs to kind of digest and everything, and player development people of the organization. We were strictly in charge of like the grunt work, the upcoming opponents and everything like that. So they had a hub where you were able to claim quarters of games,
Okay,
where
gotcha.
I would be able to say like, hey, I can do quarter 1 and 2 of this Pistons versus Hawks game.
Gotcha.
And like I said, we would have to download the game from the NBA archive, and from there, it was a lot of pausing and rewinding. This pick and roll coverage. At the time, it was probably Al Horford posts up on the block and he spun right and did a little mini hook shot, and then you would have to say, oh, JaVale McGee, who was guarding him, he was just a little late in terms of contesting, and we had a whole sorts of dictionary definitions in terms of how contests were. If a player was about their apex, met their apex on their jump, that was a really good contest. If they were even just a little bit late on their jump, where you see the LeBrons or the Kawhis when they fade away on the jump shot, and that defender is just barely right behind them, that would count as a late contest. So from like the NBA world, it's really hard to kind of judge these professionals of like, what's a good contest in high school and even in college might be a super late contest in the
Sure.
NBA, just because the details and the spacing matters.
Yep.
So yeah, that's typically how it went. It was a lot of the upcoming games, instead of like, there wasn't like a, hey, I get to do all the Lakers, or hey, I get to do all the Golden State or the Spurs. It was just based off who was coming up on our schedule next and whoever could do them.
Gotcha. So that leads me to my next question that is on the list. Do you have a hard time watching basketball now and not like overanalyzing it or feeling yourself analyzing it?
No, I get that question a lot, and actually, no. I think from the experience I've had, it actually enhances it by tenfold.
Sure.
From a casual standpoint, like we casual viewer like look for the cool, you know, LeBron dunks, or the Dwight Howard blocks at the time, or anything like that. But when you do this job for 2 years, you realize there's a lot of details on the court that you kind of pick up on. You realize a lot of teams run the same inbounds, for example, inbound plays, or you realize that you look at players' body language and you realize like, oh, he screwed up on this defensive assignment, or even like the kind of the big overarching things. Like you get the kind of the tendency to realize that like, oh, it's not always the center's fault that player, they gave up the basket. It was actually the point guard's fault for, allowing that drive lane to be created in the first place. So a lot of the times it was, even from watching games to this day, I always kind of keep back in mind like, oh, this is how I would track that play,
Yeah.
and just kind of do it on the fly, which certainly has not ruined basketball for me, thank God. But I can totally see, if people putting more than 40 hours a week at doing this job, I can definitely see them not watch basketball anymore because how tedious quarter watching was.
Now, let me ask you one little quick question because I know you said you recently got married before we started the podcast. Does
Yes.
your wife watch this with you? And for me at least, when I'm watching the games and I turn into Mr. Analyst too, and I'll start saying, "Look at this, look at this," my wife starts to get annoyed because she just wants to watch the game or pretend to watch the game. Does that happen with you?
I'm a quiet watcher, so I don't necessarily, I always applaud her when she does want to watch the games. It's definitely she's not the sports wife, Gene of like, hey, I want to watch games with you. She usually does her
Sure.
own thing, which is like all good because like some games are really stressful, and I do like have my superstitions. Like I feel like every time she comes, she kind of joins me in if she kind of joins me like kind of mid game and the Blazers start doing really bad, I tell her like, okay, you need to leave room.
We're all
Some
that
bad
way.
juju. There's some bad juju going on here. I gotta, especially during the playoffs, it was a lot like that where I would scream 1 second, she'd be like, "Oh my god, what happened?" And then like something disastrous would happen. Be like, "Why are you in here? This is not good. You're messing with the flow." So, yeah, the the job has not swayed me of my superstition or my fandom by any means.
Sorry, Fawad. I kind of went crazy
Yeah,
on the question. There, go for
yeah,
it.
no, that's fine. You're all good. Is there anything that you remember that was like really interesting to you or some surprising that um I don't know, just caught your eye and you thought like most fans wouldn't know?
Um, this I guess from a tendency perspective, at the end of the day, we didn't have the results. I would do a quarter or 2 quarters, and there wasn't like a final results page. I would be able to see and be like, oh, I didn't realize Tony Parker ran like 20 pick and rolls in this game. You just kind of did them on the fly, and you just kind of assume like, oh, that's a lot of pick and rolls. So, from an interesting notes perspective, from what I said earlier, it's all about the destination, not the journey. When you're doing tendency tracking, it was brutal doing the Spurs back then because the Spurs were prioritized on ball movement. You would have to start the action of like, hey, Tony Parker, initiated a pick and roll with Tim Duncan, which would lead to like 10 to 12 passes afterwards, and you would have to track every single pass in terms of like, oh, I went to Danny Green in the corner. He dribbled twice, kicked it out to Mono Ginobili. He drove to the corner, and then the defender came up and stopped him, and then he kicked it out to Tony Parker back in the corner. He drove in dish and then dumped it off to Tim Duncan, and it was just this string of plays that only resulted for one basket at a time. So, um, it's and then the next day I would do like something like the Houston Rockets, where it's just like, oh, it's just a pick and roll with James Harden. He just chucked it from 37 feet away, and that was the play, and you just kind of move on. So, from an interesting or things that we've always noted, I think it was kind of like how the game has changed significantly when it comes to rebounding. We would have to analyze every single rebound that took place, and you would see more surprising how many rebounds go outside of the paint, because the what the 3-point shooting has done to this game in terms of how long rebounds have taken, um, really emphasized like wing rebounding or perimeter rebounding that typical bigs are not usually responsible for. That's one of those things where you kind of slowly start realizing, especially after 2 years I've been doing it, is you realize like long rebounding, you would see like, oh, Klay Thompson grabbed an offensive rebound that you wouldn't have expect that to happen, even 10 years ago. So, those are like the kind of the surprising things I've always noted. um, but it's just kind of like the how different stars play, is another thing too. I mentioned on top there how much James Harden is responsible for, or like, the hometown favorite, Dame, how much Dame is responsible, how much he creates on offense. It's surely underappreciated, and especially a lot of casual watchers.
Sure, makes total sense too. So, what's something that either the Blazers or your guys' team wanted you guys to focus on that maybe the fan base or casual fans wouldn't even think was something that would be focused on, or was there even something like that?
No, there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis on like a a hypothesis that we would be given, like, hey, do teams run who run pick and rolls instead of handoffs, do they do better than on offense? And there wasn't any kind of hypothesis that would be leaned down. We were strictly just report anything that would happen on the court. So there wasn't like this
Sure.
whole like I keep saying hypothesis, but it was there wasn't anything that would come down like a mandate of like, hey, we are only going to watch pick and roll stuff. We don't care about handoffs or screening or anything like that. It was um, just kind of ebbs and flows of the game when you're doing you're watching tendencies. And so I think from a what you kind of originally asked, like, hey, are there players better on paper, or fans don't realize who are pretty good. Especially in the Blazers era, I was always excited when garbage time came on because I knew our second round picks were actually kind of good. Like that was the era of the Allen Crabs, the Pat Connaughtons, the Laymans of the world.
Yeah.
I always felt like when I watched them, I was like, you know what? If they were just given a chance, especially with like how frustrating, inconsistent, how Harkless and Alfred Camino were during those seasons of
Sure.
like, I feel like Jake Layman could hit a shot here. Oh, I feel like Alan Crabb could really make an impact. And um, we see a lot of success stories of, our second round picks eventually breaking into the rotation during the third season and having a pretty good year, and then end up getting the big bucks elsewhere, like Alan Crabb, for example, when we traded off to Brooklyn after we matched his contract eventually. But I think that's one of the things that a lot of people just don't realize. Like the stats don't tell the whole story with some players. You kind of know like the players are good, especially when I'd done my job for 2 years. Like I could tell, like, oh, Jake Lemon, he brings something to the court. He's not going to be, the next LeBron, but he's kind of interesting. And so that's what always kind of intrigues me about just watching any player, any team's draft choices of like, there's talent on the bench that, a lot of teams don't utilize because either it's fit or situational or whatever it could be. So stats don't tell it all. You really just got to watch the game. Even in garbage times, you can really tell players who don't go in the game and just think they have to take as soon as they get their first pass, they jack up a shot. You kind of
Sure.
want to look for players who actually still run the offense, even when either we're winning by 20 or down by 20 with only a minute left to go and the subs come in. You can kind of tell who's like a real pro and who's just kind of hoping to hit like a three, and so they said they did something in their net game.
Well, and like you said, stats don't always necessarily mean as much as people take it, and which is why I find what you did so interesting, because it's true. Just because these players can have these crazy statistics does not necessarily mean that is equaling success on the court too. So when you analyze things, more of a when he goes to the right compared to the left, like those are stats that no one ever thinks of, but it really does make a difference. And I can tell you from myself playing basketball, when I go left, I tend to pull up a lot more, whereas when I go right, I tend to drive more. And it's like things that nobody probably realizes that's a casual fan, or even me really. I don't ever pay attention that close to what way people drive or what tendencies they have, but it's just so interesting to know that is something that every team takes in account when they're watching these games.
Oh yeah, you can certainly tell. I mean, for the folks listening to this, if you go to a high school game, for example, and just watch high schoolers warm up, if you're on the high school team and you're watching the opposing team warm up and you're watching their star player, you could tell pretty quickly whether it's how they're shooting or how comfortable they are dribbling. You can tell like, hey, I can pick them apart. Especially when I play pickup. And as I said from the start of this podcast, I kind of developed a little bit too late for my high school career to kind of take off. I think I'm a pretty good player now, especially playing with with college adults and everything like
Sure.
that. But you can kind of realize like, oh, players aren't used to splitting the screen, for example, or you can tell a player like really likes driving with their dominant hand, and what happens when you force them to go on their left hand, it's usually pretty disastrous. So it's definitely harder on the NBA level because these players are so skilled where it's like
Yeah.
you feel like they can do anything, and it's like, okay, but it's the players that you realize don't have that certain skill set. It's like if you ever watch Killian Hayes for the Pistons, for example, he has no left hand still. And it's one of those things where you kind of like, as a casual fan, you can kind of probably recognize like, oh yeah, it is kind of hard to develop your offhand when you're not used to it. And even the pros have this problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a lot of it. It was just like you kind of know what players can do, and that was a lot of the frustrating stuff too. Is like I would scream at the TV watching Warriors games when the Blazers would play them, and be like, I would know about 5 seconds ahead of time what Steph Curry would do off a certain pick and roll coverage, and I would scream at my TV, be like, "Hey, he's going to pull up. He's just going to pull up. Why are you sagging off?" Or like Myers would cover him, and like Myers would like back up all the way to the key. I'm going, that's Steph Curry. What are you doing, dude? Why are you
That's
doing this? And
amazing.
so it's kind of the curse of being this hyper, aware what players are doing on the court, and the
Sure.
frustration you get of like, man, this is your job. If you're, the Myers Leonards of the world, or even like, I would criticize Dame too. It's just like, you can really succeed a lot in your career if you just knew a little bit more about the scouting of these players. I mean, there's not much you can do with Steph Curry when he shoots a three anyways, but it's
Yeah.
like reducing that impact of like, guys, like, why when you if a pick and roll is happening with Steph Curry, nobody should leave Steph Curry. Like if Farouk Aminu is covering that screen on the roller, and Farouk doesn't pick him up and it ends up being a three, it's like, man, like I have sympathy for Stotts at times, because I'm just realizing like there's only so much a coach can do, and the players, you have to play the players eventually. It's just I could totally sympathize with some of the coaching staff must feel, especially for game planning.
It's super interesting. I wish I could like relate to that and just be able to know the players are doing it ahead of time. Um, Kind of going back to something you said earlier, like you said you focused only on like the teams that we were about to play, like that were coming up. So was there another team that focused on watching the Blazers and see what our own players' tendencies were, or was that just like the main coaching staff, or how did that work, if you know?
No, I don't know the actual details. If there was I would imagine probably my manager probably coordinated. He probably did the Blazers games in terms of making sure all the data is correct and it's accurate and everything like that. Throughout the season, when we do games, we always got feedback from our manager, be like, oh, you missed this coverage. Like it wasn't a pick and roll. It started off with the handoff, and making sure that we're crossing our T's at the end of the day, make sure we're getting the right statistics down. So there wasn't, it was probably the coaching staff that would definitely probably review game film with the players themselves. You probably see that during when players talk on interviews, or even you see photos on planes when they're traveling. You always see players with their iPads or laptops with assistant coaches, or with other players kind of like digesting what they're doing. So I would imagine the main video coordinator is doing that, but it's probably a lot of the time it's probably players themselves digesting how they're doing on game film. It wouldn't surprise me that players would watch their own highlights. Like, oh, I'm sure Dame probably watches when he got 50 against OKC like almost every day. I would if I were him. But these players become so much better when they realize what they're doing wrong on the court too. So you
Exactly.
know, you don't when you're watching on YouTube, it's not exactly you're seeing like, oh, there isn't exactly a super popular highlight film of Dame missing pick and roll coverages, or like easy things like, why did you take a charge there, or why did you double team this person, why'd you lay off that. So a lot of the times I would imagine it's a lot of players owning that to themselves to get better. Because, like I said, game film does not lie. A player can say, "Oh, I totally thought I had the right coverage there," and then you look at the replay a little bit later, and they go, "Oh shit, that was probably not a good thing to do."
Exactly.
And so, like I said, you can really tell which players actually do that and actually learn from their mistakes. Unlike probably some players in the league where you realize, like, man, he keeps doing the same thing. It's really frustrating. And it would be like throughout the season and be like, man, that's kind of disappointing. Kind of like the Myers Leonard syndrome's like, man, Myers, why don't you shoot the three? You're really good at shooting at threes, but man, he hesitates every single time, even though
Every
he's 15.
time.
Every single
It
time,
took
and
forever to shoot.
it takes forever to shoot. But it was a beautiful shot. I mean, because how big he was, it was just line drives into the basket. It was
Yep.
beautiful.
Yep.
I'm just glad his I mean, knock on wood, it's Myers Leonard. He definitely did not have a great season this year for off the court, but it was kind of like a big slap in the face when he had that Warriors moment of like
Oh.
when he scored 37 or
Oh,
whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. You had
So
your
you could
Andre
do
Von.
that.
Yeah, you could do that. Okay, that's cool, man.
That was even though we lost, that's such a like funny game to go back and watch, just knowing what he did in that game. It's just like we've had him for so many years and it's like this is finally him doing it and now he's not even with us.
Yeah, that game is typically on my rotating games. I kind of watch every year. I have a set of Brandon Roy games and definitely more than enough Damian Lillard games where I have on a rotating playlist when I'm working my 9 to 5 job where I'll just play in the background, be like, oh, that's cool. Brandon Roy, 52 against Phoenix is in there. And then, but I'll have like the random ones. Like some of my favorite ones are actually like the Jake Layman eruptions he had against the Pelicans where he scored like 25 in the quarter that one time,
yeah.
or
I think it was
the
20.
Myers Leonard game where he finally throws it down. He has that weird celebration when he throws it down on Draymond Green at the end of that the game. It's like totally encompasses Myers.
Remember that too. That's so funny.
So it's like I said, it's like the really random highlights that I kind of have stored in the back of my mind where I always go, hey, if I want to feel happy, I'll watch Dame's 50 against OKC. That's always kind of my go-to. But like I will even watch like the I remember like the CJ game he had against Minnesota when Dame was out and he almost had a triple double, and
Almost, yep.
that was like one of those things where it's like, DJ, why don't you just try to do that every
Yes.
game with Dame playing? Why don't you be more of a playmaker? Like, and you were drawing fouls, and you were just awesome. And then the next game, Dame comes back, and you're just kind of like not that player anymore.
To the scoring.
Yeah, I
just
always
scoring.
say that like CJ without Dame is completely different player than the CJ we see normally.
Yeah.
I'm hoping Billups is able to unlock that playmaking side of him more regularly, but I don't know. I've hoped that every offseason and it never really happens, so we'll see.
Well, with that being said, let's move into this last little set of questions here. How do you feel, Pierce, about this coming season?
Well, viewer discretion. I want to make sure people don't know I'm Neil O'Shea when I say this. I feel like this offseason, I feel like this is going to be the best team in the Dame era this season.
I honestly agree with you. Honestly,
it's definitely controversial, but it's like one of those deals where I kind of cringe too, going like, shit, Neil didn't really have a whole lot of options this offseason to kind of do anything about our situation, our predicament, and it's like, from the outside looking in, it's like, okay, we're kind of doing our best, but I'm truly excited for this season. From an analytical standpoint, our starting lineup, which is coming back this season, was one of the best starting lineups of last season. We had, I think, like the 4th or 5th best net rating in the entire league with Dame, CJ, Norm, Rocco, Covington, and Nurk. and then our bench would just fall apart. And that kind of leads me to why I was super excited with the additions of Larry Nance to um, uh, Cody Zellers, the development of Nazir Little. If you saw the highlight of today of Nazir Little shooting threes today on their Twitter page,
Yeah.
it looks really good. And so, last season was certainly disappointing, but I understand it from a day to day what players had to go through. I don't think a COVID season is not something to just say, oh, they didn't just have fans in the stands. They had the logistics of every player who were, and they would travel, to the East Coast on back to backs and everything like that. They couldn't just go to bed right away. They would have to get their COVID test at 5 a.m. as soon as they get into the hotel, and that's certainly a process of itself. When you go to opposing cities, you're not allowed to do anything like they typically do, whether those are press events or Nike events or even just going to the James Harden special, going to strip clubs. Um, no, I really feel for the players. I think it really took a toll on them. It definitely took a toll on probably the coaching staff too. So
Sure.
as disappointing as it was last season, and certainly changes need to be made, I'm really excited for this season. As much as I love Melo and Cantor from personality standpoint, like as we talked about earlier about watching certain players' highlights to kind of make me feel happy, I always go back to that Cantor 30-30 game.
Yep.
Like, was that kind of peak Cantor. He's always going to be on our record books, and I'm glad he is because he's definitely a hardworking dude. But man, he cannot play a lick of defense to save his life.
Not
Is
at
super
all.
frustrating. So like, as non-exciting as it is to sign like the backup center in Charlotte of Cody Zeller, or I guess he was starting at times, but he's a really good player from an analytics standpoint. If you're interested in taking a look at those things, he's this like kind of like a non-canter all-star. Like he's really good at defense in terms of stripping, knows his positions, can actually kind of guard wings or sorry guards off the pick and roll to a reasonable degree instead of just letting him walk into the lane like Cantor does. And then like some of the offensive like yes, no shots that Melo would take during our second bench units will kind of be distributed with Larry Nance and like whoever our third guard who stays in the game, whether that's CJ or Norm or even Dame. I think our offensive continuity throughout the bench is just going to be so much better than last year because I can remember half a dozen times where we would end the first quarter, up by 10, and then within 2 minutes to go in the or with 2 minutes that went through in the second quarter with 10 minutes left, would be down by like 9 again. Be like, well, shit, because we can't play defense. Or
Exactly.
and I get the limitations. People were screaming about Harry Giles can save this team, but man, Harry Giles was not the savior that everyone kind of wished he thought he was, or he could be. He was kind of a mess too. So yeah, that's what I'm super excited about. And like I said, the Nazir Little development. I would say like keep an eye on that. That might be our, Gary Trent kind of all-star this year in terms of kind of is brought up because of situation. I think he's going to be really good, especially under Chauncey Billups, which I think, isn't really talked about, but I think Chauncey is going to bring the biggest addition to this team. I really, outside the off-court issues that, Blazers kind of really wish they could have done better announcing Chauncey's arrival. But, the difference between what he's been saying and what Stotts' philosophy for years makes me really excited for this upcoming season. As well as long as we try to stay healthy, that's always the knock on wood. Just stay healthy. Larry Nance, Cody Zeller, God, Nurk, CJ, like just make it to the postseason healthy, my dudes. Like this, like I said, I feel like I said, I told you I might sound like Neil O'Shea, but this might be. I feel like the Blazers are kind of destined for like a pretty good situation this season, especially with the Western Conference being what probably is as weak as it is since we've been kind of in the playoffs. I mean, we have the Lakers; their average age is like 40. Clippers don't have Kawhi. The The Warriors are
Nuggets don't have
without
Murray.
Clay until Christmas, and we don't know what they're relying on rookies for the most part. I mean, Steph is amazing, but Steph can't be amazing all throughout. You saw last year in the play-on game. Like there's limitation in that roster. I mean, I think Utah is still going to be really good, but like this idea that Luka and the Mavericks are going to be super good, I need to see it to believe it. I think that team kind of feels like LeBron in the Cavs when he was his first stint. Like you have this really amazing player, but they can't add players around him, or they're adding players who just don't match with Luka, like KP for example, or Kristaps Porzingis. So, like I said, the East Coast is definitely a juggernaut with Brooklyn and everything like that. But it really feels like the Blazers, if they just trust in the process, and Dame is on board with this. I know Dame was frustrated last season, but I really think like we're going to hit this year running, and we may see ourselves in that 2 seed most of the season, barring injury.
And I like that outlook. Fawad, do you have anything you want to add before we wrap this up?
I was just gonna comment on that's like some high expectations, like second or third seed. I'm a fan of Olshey as well. Like I was thinking maybe 5 or 6, but I hope you're right. Other than that, I don't think I have any more questions. It was really fun listening to everything you had to say. Alex, do you have anything else to add?
No, I like you said, Pierce. Nasir Little's one of the biggest. I think if he can develop what we think he can and what it looks like he can, I think that's going to be the biggest addition to us, and that's going to help us out even more. Before we wrap it up, do you have anything you want to add, Pierce?
No, not at all. This podcast is awesome. I'm glad I came across it on the Blazers subreddit. Listeners, if you're obviously listening to this, please definitely share it with your friends. Even join in. I know these guys have the listeners podcast where anybody can kind of participate. So, definitely, definitely keep up the good work, guys. I really enjoy it. And if anybody's listening to this or is super interested in knowing more about the Blazers and how I got my job and everything like that, more than happy to kind of expand upon on that. If there needs to be any follow-up episodes or anything like that. But like I said, guys, thanks for having me on. It's always great to talk about Blazers.
Hey, we appreciate you saying what you just said there, and we really appreciate you coming in and talking. I mean, I know I'm sure you probably get asked that 1,000 times how it was, but we appreciate it. It's it's awesome to listen to those experiences, and I just want to thank you for coming in and doing this with us. And I hope to have you back again.
Yeah, no sweat. I would, just how fun this was. I definitely imagine a couple podcasts throughout the season of how silly my expectations were.
Hey, that works for me.
When the inevitable like whatever injury happens or whatever player isn't performing well, if Nurk isn't the Nurk that we would hope, or even Chauncey is, I can imagine already a couple nightmare scenarios happening. But like I said, I'm optimistic in nature, and hopefully, Fawad, when I know you're a Toronto native, hopefully you're able to come into Portland where we're parading down the street with a championship this season.
Love it.
I'll book my plane ticket in advance.
Okay, well, Pierce, I appreciate you coming. We're gonna wrap it up here. As always, if you guys want to join in on the conversations, you can join our Discord. You can follow us on Twitter. You can give us questions, give us takes, and like Pierce mentioned earlier, we always do these listener episodes where you can come in and talk with us. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great night. Pierce, once again, thanks for joining and talking with us. And as always, Rip City, baby.